Hello folks. So in the last video I got as far as adding in this little enemy character, and I got a little bit of animation working as well, so you can see he's kind of trying to do a little walk, but he's not moving anywhere. So what I want to focus on in this video is adding a little bit more AI into this and getting these enemies to walk along until they reach the castle and then start to attack it. So most of that is going to happen within the enemy script that I've written here, enemy.py. So I want to open that one up and start adding in this extra functionality to it. Before I do anything else though, there is something that I want to fix that isn't actually obvious when you just run the game, and that is the rectangle for this player. So if I display what the rectangle looks like at the moment, remember to create that rectangle within the constructor for the enemy, I just called self-image and I created rectangle from it. Now if I come into this update method here where I'm drawing that image onto the screen and I draw the rectangle as well, so I can say pygame.draw.rect and it goes onto the screen, which will have to be surface. Then for the color, I don't have any colors defined, but this is just temporary here, so I'll just put white. And then I'll put self.rect, and I think I can add on one more argument, which will be the border. So let's run this within the main game loop and see what happens. Okay, so there you can see there's this white outline around the image, but it's way bigger than the actual enemy. And the reason for that is just because the images themselves are like that. So if I go into this night image and into the walk section, open that up, you can see that is the border of the image. So when I tell PyGame to get a rectangle from it, it just takes the entire outline. Now this is all transparent, so when I run the code down here, you can see that it looks fine, but in reality that is the size of the image and therefore the size of the rectangle. That's going to cause me issues when I come to try and detect collision. So for example, if I want to know when this guy has reached the castle and I look for collision between him and the castle rectangle, well, it's going to give me collision way too early because it's going to take this line as the rectangle boundary rather than somewhere around here. Same with shooting. If I try and shoot him, if I'm looking for a collision with the rectangle, you'll see that I can hit anywhere within here and that's going to detect a collision. So actually what I need to do is create a custom rectangle for this. So rather than just taking it from the image itself, I want to size it manually to be about the same size as the enemy. So if I go back into my enemy class here, and where I'm creating the rectangle to start with, rather than just taking it straight from the image, I can just define the size of it manually. So my self.rect becomes a pygame rectangle. So pygame.rect. Notice that it has to have a capital R here. And then I can give it a size. So I'll say the X and Y coordinates are going to be 0 and 0, but then the width I will set to 25 pixels and the height to 40 pixels. So I've kind of played around with this previously, and these are the sizes that come out roughly giving me a boundary of the actual player rather than the entire image. So with that done, let's see what it actually looks like now. I'll run the main code again, and now you can see the rectangle is a lot smaller and it does kind of look about the same size as the player. However, they're not lining up with each other. So what I now need to do, the rectangle itself is my defining feature. So that's what's going to be used for collisions and positioning. The image isn't as important. So what I want to do, rather than putting the rectangle to where the image is, I want to put the image to where the rectangle is. And I simply do that by controlling this blit function here. So this is the update method of the enemy class. Rather than just drawing that image straight onto the location of the rectangle, I can take the rectangle's X and Y coordinates and offset it. So we'll replace this part here, and instead of that I just give it X and Y coordinates. So I take my rectangle's X coordinate and I'll offset the picture 10 pixels to the left, because you could see that it was the image was to the right and below where the rectangle was. And for the Y coordinate I do the same thing, self.rect.y minus 15 pixels. Then I go back and run this again, and now you can see that's a lot better. Now you can tweak this a little bit more if you like. You can, there's maybe a pixel or two down the bottom that you could extend it, but I think for the purpose of this, that's pretty accurate, and it's going to give me a decent hitbox as well as good collision detection when it gets to the castle. So now that that's out of the way, I can start coding in some AI. And what I want to do first is to actually get these enemies to move across the screen. I'll do that all within this update method. So I'll get rid of all this stuff, move it down a little bit, and basically what I want to do we'll say, first of all, with a comment, check if enemy has reached the castle. So basically, I just want the enemy to keep moving to the right until it detects collision with the castle object or the castle rectangle. Well, that means that I need to be able to check for collision with that, so I need the castle rectangle to be within this method. Of course, this class here is on its own. It's within this script, so it doesn't know what the castle is. As far as this is concerned, that doesn't exist. That means that I need to feed that in as one of the arguments. So after surface, I'm going to add an extra argument, and I'll call this the target. Now I need to go back into my main code here, and just down in the main game loop where I'm calling, this is my enemy group update method. At the moment, I've got the first argument, which is a display screen or surface, and then the second argument is going to be the castle. So this is the target that I want to be checking against, and that's my castle instance right here. So now I want to just be able to move the player along until it hits that. To check that collision, I just say if self.rect right. So basically, if the right hand side of the enemy rectangle has gone beyond the target's left hand side, rect.left, well, that means that it's past it. It has reached the end and is basically at the castle now. So at that point, I want to be able to stop walking and instead start attacking. So I'll put a pass here for now. And in fact, what I'll do is I'll just say print, say reached castle. And this is just a handy way of troubleshooting as you go along. Before I code too much, I just add these little print statements, and it just kind of helps me show what's going on and whether things are being detected. And of course, I missed a pretty obvious step, which is to actually move them along. So of course, that's never going to be met. And now remember, the position of the enemy is controlled by the rectangle coordinates. So all I need to do, I can say move enemy. I simply increase the x coordinate. So I say self.rect.x is increased by self.speed. So that's a speed argument that I have within this constructor. So when I create the enemy class, I assign a speed to it, and I believe at the moment I've just set it to 1. So the x coordinate is going to increase by 1 every iteration. Run this again, and there he goes. Now he's walking across. I have no trigger to stop him, so he's just going to keep going. But you notice, as soon as he got to the castle, I'm now getting this print here saying reached castle. And now he's gone off the screen and he just keeps going and going. But I can see that partially now this is starting to work. What I need to be able to do is differentiate between the different actions. So whether he's walking or attacking, or if he's died, I need him to be able to do different things from within this update method. Now remember, there is this self.action variable, which started off at 0. And 0 just corresponds to walking. So whenever these enemies are created, they automatically begin walking, and that's all they're going to do until something triggers it to change. So I want to be able to control that here. So this move enemy, I only want that to happen as long as the action is 0. So as long as I'm telling the enemy to move, only then will they continue moving. So we can say if self.action equals 0, then we increase the, and in fact I'll add a little comment here, update rectangle position. So as long as self.action is equal to 0, then he's just going to keep moving to the right. But when he reaches that point, or if something else happens, self.action needs to change, and that's going to stop him moving. Well, the first trigger that I've got for that is this section up here, when I'm looking for the enemy to reach the castle. So rather than saying print reached castle, let's replace that with self.action equals 1. And 1 is going to be attack. In fact, I'll add comments here just to explain what each one is. So 0 is walk, 1 is attack, and 2 is death. And remember, these aren't arbitrary. I haven't just made these up. If I go back into my main game loop, if you remember from the previous video when I was loading in all of the animations, well, that is just the order of the animation types. So the actions correspond to this list. So that's 0, that's 1, and that's 2. So walk, attack, and death. And that's what this action here corresponds to. So now what should happen is when the enemy reaches that rectangle, the castle, the action becomes 1, and then this condition is no longer met. So it should stop moving. So let's go back, run this again. I should really get him to start over here actually to speed this up a little. And there we go. he's reached the end, the action has changed, and notice straight away he's gone into the attacking animation because the animations are controlled by that action variable. So it kind of does more than one thing. It's quite a handy way of controlling what's going on with the enemies. And because these are set up as classes, it means that each enemy is going to be independent of each other. So every one of them is going to have their own action variable. So one of them could reach the castle and start attacking, while the others are still walking behind, or maybe others still have been shot and are now dead. So they're all going to be controlled independently. Now there is one slight issue with this that's maybe not immediately obvious, and in fact it probably wouldn't make too much of a difference to the game. But remember, the animations are controlled by this frame index here. There are 20 images within each animation, and the frame index chooses which one I'm in. So when I change the action here to 1, the frame index didn't get reset. So if I was in, say, halfway through a walking animation, this is just going to then put me halfway through an attacking animation because the frame index is just going to continue where it was. What I actually need to do is reset my animation variables as well. So what I could do here is say the frame index is 0 and the update time is whatever the current time is, but that's going to be repetitive, having to do it every time I change the action. So instead, I will create a new method within this class that's going to do that for me. So I'll come just down here underneath where I've got update animation, and I'll create a new method called update_action. And this is going to take the argument of self and the argument of new action. So the first thing that I want to do is check if the new action is different to the previous one. So I know what the current action is because there is a self.action variable. If I pass a new action, if I say, for example, let's replace this bit here actually, let's just do that now. So instead of saying self.action equals 1 when the enemy has reached the castle, I will say self.update action, and then I will give it the argument of 1 instead. So this is allowing me to call, because I'm saying self., it's allowing me to call this method from that class or from that instance, and then I'm giving it the argument of new action, which I'm setting to 1, which is attack. So when that happens, first of all, I want to check whether that's different to what he was doing before. So if the new action is not equal to the current action, well, in that case, we're going to continue with this and we're going to change the action type. So we'll say self.action is new action. And if that is the case, then update the animation settings. So here is where I reset everything. So I say frame index is 0. So I restart at image 0 and basically right at the beginning of the animation. And I want to change my last update time. So self.update time becomes the current time. So I just take a timestamp of the point when I change the animation type, and then I start counting everything again. So why have I got this check here? Why am I saying if new action is not equal? Why do I not just do this straight away? Well, this condition up here is going to be met numerous times. So as soon as the enemy has reached the castle, then this is going to be triggered straight away. So I don't want to just keep resetting the frame index to 0 because then the animation would just get stuck at the very first frame. So I only want this to occur if he's going from a walking to an attacking, or basically if he's changing actions from one to another. If the action is already the same as what I'm wanting to change to, then we just ignore this. None of this happens and the animation continues as it was. Okay, so I'll rerun this. Nothing's really going to be obviously different, but I just want to make sure there's no typos and that it still works. And I will also change the X coordinate for where this guy starts, so he doesn't have to walk so far. Okay, so he's walking across, reaches that point, and I know now that the method is working correctly because he has gone into the next animation. Okay, so one more thing that I want to add in this video is to actually be able to shoot these guys. So at the moment the bullets just fly straight through him, and that's because I haven't added any checks for collision between the bullets and the enemy sprite. So I'm going to do that within the enemy class as well. Now one thing to remember is, again, just like the castle target, this code here in this class doesn't know about the bullets, so I need to feed those into the update method as one of my arguments. So I'll add in here bullet_group. And that bullet group is the group that's within my main code. So remember, when I created my groups, I created one for the bullets, and then whenever I click the mouse button, I generate a new bullet and add it into that group. And then it's just controlled within the main game loop here. So what I want to do now that I'm passing those groups into, in fact, I need to make sure that I am passing them, to add that in and as an argument here. So we'll say bullet underscore group. Oops. So now that that's being fed in, the enemy class is going to know about them and it can process them within the update method. So then the first check, before I even check whether the enemy has reached the castle, I want to check for collision. So I can say here, check for collision with bullets. Now I could check two ways, right? I could either check for the bullets colliding with the enemy or the enemy colliding with the bullets. There is a little bit of a nuance between which way you do it. So here I'm looking at the enemies and I'm checking for collision with all of the bullets. So I can say if pygame.sprite collide. So this is just another function that's part of PyGame's sprite classes and sprite collisions. Essentially, it's going to allow me to check for collision between each enemy. So I can say the first argument is self, and then a group of sprites. So this is where the bullet group comes in. And then there's an additional argument, which is do kill. So this is going to say, if I set this to false, then whenever there's a collision, nothing happens. It will register the collision, but the bullets will keep going. If I set this to true, then whenever there is a collision, the bullet is automatically deleted. So this is just a handy way for me to control whether or not the bullets need to stay on the screen afterwards. And for now, I'm just going to say print hit. So let's go back and run this code and just see if I get anything detected. And there you go. You notice there's a couple of hits. Every time I hit the enemy, it does register. And also the bullet just instantly disappears. And I can test that by changing this back to false. So if I set this to false, run this again, the bullet, you notice it just keeps going through. On top of that, the collision is detected multiple times because the bullet keeps moving. So each iteration of its movement, it detects further collisions. So that's why this is quite an important thing to keep in mind. You want to make sure that if it's something that you want to get rid of after the collision, you set that variable to true. So it's fine to say print hit, but I actually want to be able to take some damage onto the enemy. So I want to lower the enemy's health. And I should have an argument up here, self.health equals health. So each of these instances has a health. So all I need to do here is just reduce that health. I can say self.health is reduced, health is reduced by, and you can set this to a different number to make it easier or harder to kill them. I'm just going to say 25 because I have used multiples of 25 for the healths. If I come back up to, where did I create them? Here, my enemy health. Now I will add more to this list as I go, but they're going to be in multiples of 25. So that means that the knight takes 3 bullets to kill. Okay, so that's fine, but what happens when the health reaches 0? Well, I want the enemy to basically stop doing everything. I just wanted to move on to the death animation, stop moving, and basically just lie there dead. So I need to make sure that I'm checking for that. So above my update animation method, I'm just going to add it in here. So it's just going to be one of the last things that I check for. And I'll say a comment to say check if health has dropped to 0. If self.health, is less than or equal to 0, then I just want to trigger the fact that the enemy has died. And how do I do that? Well, remember, self.action is what controls pretty much everything that's going on with these enemies. So self.action will become 2. 2 corresponds to death. And the way I do that, remember, was by calling the update action method. So I say self.update underscore action, and this time the argument is 2. Let's put bracket comment here to say death. Okay, so that's going to partially work. If I run this code now and start shooting this guy, hit him 3 times, and he's dead, but you notice he's stuck in this animation loop. That's because the animation just keeps resetting back to 0. So the fix here is that I need to make sure that when the death animation is fully run out, it doesn't continue. It needs to stop and basically be over and done with. And that's controlled within this update animation method. So I just need to add a little tweak into it. So this part here is the section that handles the animation resetting. So essentially it's saying that if the frame index, which is the index of the animation list, has reached the end of the list, then we reset it back to 0 and the animation starts over again. But I don't want that to happen if the enemy has died. So I need to add an if statement here. If self.action is equal to 2, which is the death animation, then I don't want that to happen. So I'll just put pass in here for now. I'll add that code in a second. But I'll say else. So if the animation is anything else, which is either a walking or attack animation, then continue as I was before. Reset the animation back to 0 and just keep looping through it. But what I want to do in here basically is when I get to the very end of the animation, I want the frame to stick at that last frame. So my frame index, rather than becoming 0, it just stays at whatever the very last frame is. So I take this line from up here. This is the section that works out how many images there are within the animation, and then I just subtract 1. So now if we go back to this main code, run this again, and now I'll shoot this guy a few times, he'll die, and then he stays dead. The rectangle is still here, but that doesn't really matter anymore. He's not moving, and that's pretty much the end for this enemy. But the other thing that I want to happen when the enemy is killed is that you earn money. So part of the game is that you kill the enemies, you collect money, and then you can spend it on upgrades and repairs and more towers and so on. So the castle class, which I've created down here, this is where I'm going to control money and high score and everything else. So I need to add that in here within the constructor so that I can then control it and increase it whenever one of the enemies is killed. So just underneath here, within the main code and the castle class, where I've got the health, max health, and the self-fired trigger, I can add in a couple more. So self.money is equal to 0, so start off with nothing, and then self.score is also equal to 0. So the score counter is just going to keep going up, but the money is going to go up and then it's going to come back down whenever you spend it. So the score counter is just going to track overall how many points you've scored, and then I'll be able to track a high score throughout the different games. So now let's go back into the enemy class, and when the enemy dies, which is here, so if self.health is dropped below or equal to 0, I not only want to update the action, I also want to increase the money that the castle has earned. So remember, the castle here in this context is the target. So I don't say castle.money, I say target.money is increased by 100, and target.score is also increased by 100. So what I want to do, just to double check that this is working, is just put a little print statement here, and we'll print out target.money. Now go back to the main game, run this again. So there's nothing here until I actually kill this enemy. So I killed him, I better just stop that. I killed the enemy, and then the score instantly shot up by 100, but then it just kept going. It just kept increasing over and over. So the reason that's happening is because this trigger is constantly being met. So once the enemy is dead, its health is below 0. So this is just going to keep happening. This condition is going to be met every iteration. I need a way of stopping this. I basically want to only be doing these checks as long as the enemy is alive. So then it dies basically once. Once it's dead, it's dead. So I need an extra little check in here. Now remember, I had a self.alive variable within here. So that just means that I should be able to use that variable to control what's happening when the enemy is alive and what's happening when it's dead. So let's go back up to the top of this update method. And the very first thing is if self.alive. So now I can just indent a whole bunch of this code within that alive check. And in fact, pretty much everything down to update animations is going to be indented. So remove all that, now it's nested within this if statement. So now what this is saying is, as long as that enemy is alive, then we're going to check what collision with bullets, we're going to check if he's reached the castle, we're going to move him, and we're going to check if he's died. So if this condition is met here, well, let's say self.alive now becomes false. So now the enemy is actually going to stay dead. Now let's go back here, run this again, and shoot this guy, and there we go. So he's died. We registered 100 as the increased money, but it's only happened once. So that enemy is now staying dead. Can get rid of that print statement now. We don't need that one anymore. And that's pretty much it. So if I go back and run this again, I've now implemented some basic AI. The enemies are just going to keep walking across, they reach the castle, and then they start trying to attack it. I can shoot the enemies, and once I shoot them enough, they die, and then that's them over. So what I need to start looking at next is actually dealing damage to the castle. At the moment, it's just an animation. There's no damage being done, but that's something that I'll do in the next video. So for now, if you found this useful, then please leave a like and feel free to subscribe. Thanks for watching.